Welcome back to another episode of The Closing Table. I'm your host, Tamera. Today, we're going to discuss a book that will speak to business owners, so I think that you guys are going to really enjoy the topic discussion today. But first, if you like my content, you're really going to love my escrow team. So give me an opportunity to talk to you about your title needs. You can reach out to me on any of my social media platforms. Today's guest is Lance Taylor. I've had the pleasure of having him on the podcast a few times now, so he's a repeat guest of mine. He is the top producing team owner and entrepreneur at Keller Williams of the Taylor team. He ended 2022 with $80 million in production. And he also leads a real estate team of 16. So he is a power-packed educator, and I'm really excited to continue our conversation with today. Today, we are going to discuss a book. It's called The Business Owner's Dilemma by Ali Nasser. And I'm really excited to have this conversation because I know that this is something that is really passionate to Lance. And so let's go ahead and introduce Lance. Lance, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to dig into the book.
I know, we're not going to talk about real estate today.
No.
We're going to talk about owning a business.
That's right.
And the things that you need to do to tee yourself up for success in that business. So I want to start with, there were three dilemmas that he brought up, that Ali Nasser brought up in this book. The reinvestment dilemma, the legacy dilemma, and the exit dilemma. Now, we're not going to talk about the entire content of the book today.
Right.
But one of the things that you wanted to start with was the exit dilemma. So you want to exit your business. What is that going to look like? So let's reference, what his advice was in the book versus, and combine that with your own knowledge of working with business owners, right?
Yeah, and I mean, just to take a step back, we always want to begin with the end in mind. And so when you understand what the exit looks like, it doesn't have to be even recent. It could be 10 years out, 15 years out, 20 years out, but it helps you structure along the way what you want, out of the business, and it gives you that perspective. So I think when we're talking about exit dilemma, right, you're talking about the end game goals, and exiting the business could be different can look very different. One exit could be simply selling the business, right?
Right.
So what are the resources you need to sell a business? Well, typically you want to start talking to a business broker. What is the EBITDA that you would need times the multiple in your industry that's going to give you the value of the business that you want?
And I think that's an interesting thing because I wonder how many business owners really understand how to determine the valuation of their business.
That's right. And so one of the best things you can do is start with this business broker, having a conversation and understand the landscape of businesses, how they get bought and sold. And then also, what are the things you need to do in your business, right, to make sure that it's worth as much as possible at that end goal, at that end date.
And that's something he breaks down very thoroughly. We're not going to necessarily deep dive into that today, but right. I think that is something that he really illustrates and how to determine that.
And here's the wild thing. I think we all kind of get into business because we have a burning passion, right, and knowledge about a subject. And so we just get in and just start building, right? We're just building the business. We're hiring. We're building relationships. We're doing all the things to create a successful business. And sometimes we haven't even thought about what the future looks like. We're just enjoying the process and the journey along the way. And so that's why this enters into discussion at some point to go, okay, what am I even trying to accomplish? What do I want to get out of this business? And I think your exit strategy helps you get really clear on what that's going to look like. Whether you sell, or if you even just, say you have someone you want to hand it to in your family. How do you prepare the business for that handoff? Or let's say you're going to hire the perfect person, right, that's going to run that business into the future, and you're going to hang on to it and take those profits from the business. Are you already looking for that person and grooming that person? It could take 5 years to develop into the right individual to take the company. So it just gives you a head start.
So there were three main things. Three main ways that you could exit a business, right? Mm-hmm. And you tapped into two of those. You can sell the business, you can pass it off to a family member, or you can sell it to your executive team. At least that's what he talks about.
Sure,
in the business.
That's right.
I think the conversation about passing it to your children is interesting because it can become extremely complicated.
Correct.
Interesting good, interesting bad, I don't know.
Yeah.
Depends on your kids. But, one of the illustrations that he gave in the book is, say you have 4 children, right? You have more than one child.
Yeah.
Okay. So one has plugged into the business and taken interest in it. The other one has not. So how do you tee this up so that the one that you are going to pass the business to doesn't conflict with the one who thinks that maybe they're missing out on something, even though they've had no interest in the business, right?
Yeah, it can certainly cause some discussions that are not wanted in a family, right? And cause some issues. But usually, right, in all families, the children are different. Usually you're going to have one or two, or maybe all of them, if you're really fortunate, they're going to have some type of interest in the business. And after all, we started the business with our own passion. We can't expect our children to all have the exact same passion we have. But to the level they have passion and capacity to be able to step in, there's going to be some type of increased gradient, increased opportunity for them, for them to do that. They're taking on a big role within the company for its ongoing concern. So again, I think there's a lot of discussions, I'm sure a lot of planning, and usually you're going to want to get outside support or counsel of some type, so that you can see what happens across the industry, what is normalized, and that way the children feel like they're all getting a fair shake on what the opportunity is.
And you're tapping into a different strategy about bringing all of your people together to help you plan things, right? But to back up a second, it's really interesting. I am not a business owner. Well, I have my investment properties, right? So I guess I am a business owner, but not to the level of what we're talking about today. But when I shared with you last night that this book was really overwhelming to me, because it made me think of, in a good way, but it made me think of all the things. And that's what all these flags are that I've got here, that of things I need to follow up on, because it made me really think about things like, for example, my will, right?
Yeah.
And how is that set up? And are you teeing the children up for success to take over these things? Because, and I don't want to I'm not comfortable talking about tax strategies and things. I'm not a tax advisor. But what is really interesting, what was really interesting to me is when you are ready to exit something, what are you doing to tee the next person up for success, right? And we talked about this last night when we were preparing for this, that, is because I'm a title rep, we see so many people that have passed away and they don't have wills and their heirs are fighting over things, or they're not prepared to take over what you have built in the same way that you were able to do that. Any thoughts or response about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the better you can, structure your handoff, and the more planned out it is, the better off for everyone. I mean, even to the point where, no one expects this to happen, but, it's the whole hit by a bus rule. What happens if tomorrow I'm not here? What happens to everything in my life? Where does it go? And how am I preparing my family and all of my constituents, right, to be able to take over that next step? First of all, key man life insurance is a really important piece to, especially...
Wait, say that term again?
Key man life insurance.
What's key man life insurance?
So if you're a CEO of a company, you have a lot of knowledge of running that company and organization, and if you get taken out or you're not there, incapacitated in any way, then there is monies that can come into the business, right, to help replace you. So, let's say you had a larger business and you had a $5 million policy. Life policy. You could have a disability policy even that could potentially pay the company, and that way the company then has resources to immediately go into action for an executive search to help find that right fit for the ongoing concern. So that you don't necessarily have a cash influx in the moment you need it unless you have it attached as key man life insurance piece. So there's ways to plan that component out, but then also it's not just the money, but it's also how are we documenting our business so that someone could come in and literally read a manual of every step where I'm at in that business and then jump in and be able to take action. And so, not just in the executive roles, but across all roles, what type of documentation, are the employees keeping to make sure that they can be, substituted out at the right time?
And I would think a $50 million business, for example, would have a lot of that infrastructure in place, whereas maybe a $2 to $10 million business might not have some of those things in place.
Many times not, right? So, and also, the interesting thing about a builder, an entrepreneur, is like they're focused on one thing and they're all in on it. But think about all of the pieces of knowledge that you have to have for a business, right? All the systems, all the people, all the hiring, all that. Entrepreneurs typically are missing components, right? So it's who have they hired? Who is their support person or their mentor that's telling them, hey, you need to be doing this now, and preparing your business for the future with systems and documentation, because you just don't know what's going to happen, right?
It's so funny. I knew I was going to do this at some point, but I watch Shark Tank like it's going out of style.
Yeah.
And I know when Mr. Wonderful is going to say, you have a product, not a business.
Yes, right.
And they talk about, I don't know if you watch it or not. I'm a huge fan. And I know I can almost predict when they're going to say something, especially like about evaluation or about not having a business put together properly. And they give a lot of advice, and it's very similar to what we're discussing today.
Typical. But, it's all the missing pieces, right?
And I knew I was going to talk about.
And they're delivering it on a silver platter, like I have the best thing since sliced bread.
Yeah.
Well, you're missing some pieces, right?
Yeah. And I just love it when they come in with these valuations. I'm like, they're going to get you. But that's off topic.
Yeah.
So kind of to refocus, I think that is another thing that the book does really well is it talks about how to put these plans together so that you don't have a disruption in business if your major player was to go away for whatever reason. But you're not wrong. I think that from the things that I have gathered over, reading the book and other interests, is that the entrepreneur isn't necessarily able to understand the components of the business to make sure that it's set up properly.
Correct.
Right? They're passionate about their product. They're passionate about what it is that they're putting out into the marketplace or the world. But having those key components of business, understanding having your business plan and having your exit strategy and all of these things, to protect your business are super necessary to keep things going down the road, right?
Yeah, correct. And this is a little off topic. It's not in this book, but the book Rocket Fuel talks about the visionary integrator roles. And there's two key people. Many times the builder is the visionary.
Right.
They're the ones, pouring in the passion, right? They're the idea person, right? They want to move super fast to grow this business up. The integrator is a person that is building all of the systems to support the growth in the background. So many times it's not, you have two very key people that you have to have. If you're just one of them, the business grower, you're going to have all kinds of missing pieces. And so typically you have to either hire that person for the business, or you have to have outside consultant come in and support you on knowing how do you direct your employees to build the foundation, really kind of go back in and reinforce the foundation that you're building.
Okay, let me take a couple of real life real estate examples. So it made me think of utility concierge, Gabe Ashire, and he has a business partner, Kevin, right? Gabe is the business builder, and Kevin is the infrastructure guy.
Yep.
Let's talk about maybe one of your businesses and how that dynamic works within. And you can take any one of the ones you want. I was thinking Dustin, but you can.
Well, so we'll stay in the utility concierge space. So we have Citizen Home Solutions. That's our utility concierge, right? So Wes and Will are the two individuals who have started the company. One was very sales focused and growth focused and constantly outside making connections and building that part of it. The other one is inside the company, building out the operations and the execution team so that we could get the great reviews, so that we could have the great customer service and execution on that side. So both are extremely important in a business, and you really can't have one without the other. So very similar to the Gabe and Kevin scenario. I'm
sorry I brought up your competitor.
No, that's okay, right? So and they've run a fantastic business because they struck that balance very early on.
Do you find that most business owners do locate that partner that will play to their weaknesses, whatever that may look like?
I think it depends on if it's first time around for an entrepreneur growing a business, or if it's second or third time. First time around.
Well, that makes sense because
first time around, you don't know anything about what you're doing. You're just plugging in the pieces and hoping and praying each day, right? That things are going in the right direction. The second time around, I believe you have a little more knowledge of what your deficiencies are and what you need to hire for. So a really smart person once told me is that you need to write down everything you do for a week. And then you're going to go back and you're going to rate those activities A's, B's, and C's. You're going to put an A next to the activities that you both are passionate about and you're really good at. You're going to put a B next to the activities that you're not passionate about but you're really good at. And you're going to put a C next to all the activities that you're not passionate about and you're not good at. And then you're going to take all those C activities and you're going to build out a job description. You're going to go hire that person. Those are the things you're not good at and you're not passionate about, and you need to have that person take care of that in the business.
Okay, that is a great golden nugget, you guys, on how to organize your tasks and your time so that you can leverage yourself in the best way possible, in the most profitable way possible.
That's
because
right.
If you're passionate about it, it's going to create profits.
Typically your highest and best use of time. And most entrepreneurs who start a business, you're typically in sales. That's one of your primary roles. You're the vision and you're also the sales leader to start with. Until the company starts to evolve later on, and then you may step into some other roles. But you're always driving that sales, that revenue side, because otherwise, how can the business grow and thrive?
Well, and I made an introduction about your real estate team, but you are a business owner of several businesses.
Mm-hmm.
Would you like to talk about?
Yes. So, we have some businesses in the real estate space, buying and flipping and investing in real estate, much like you have an investing business. And then, we also have a electrical contracting business. And so we have been growing and scaling that. It's in the construction industry, very, very different animal in terms of the capital requirements to grow the business. However, it has been an unbelievable learning curve on that particular business, just on the components that are needed at an early stage in a business. And typically, you always need people, processes, and capital.
Yeah.
Those are the three components of any business. Now, different percentages based on what you're actually selling. And so, for example, in the electrical contracting business, before you go take on a project, many times you have to have them bonded. Well, to have bonding, you have to have a lot of liquidity somewhere, whether it's personal liquidity or whether you're leveraging off of others or you're leveraging the business, the working capital. And so a small growing business in the construction industry, it's very difficult barrier to entry until you get that liquidity. So this is where your angel investors come in, right?
Right.
A lot of times you'll have someone who knows how to run the business, and then you have just purely a financial partner.
Yeah.
Who says, look, I'm backing everything. I'm taking a lot of the risk on my shoulders because you need to be able to show liquidity every step of the way to grow and scale this business. So that's a perfect example of that. That is one of the bigger challenges in construction in general.
Well, and I think that you've had to face those challenges at a very high pace because, correct me if I'm wrong, that business has scaled extremely quickly.
It certainly has, yes. Yeah, we're working on a 10x factor. So, as you're growing that fast, certainly challenges exist. Every business has to thrive with the right people. And to find people on short order, right, they can handle large projects. And, you don't really, as you're a new business, you don't have the attraction power because you don't have the track record yet.
Sure.
And so it all has to be kind of in lockstep. You're convincing a lot of individuals that your growth plan is better than where they're at. In the electrical contracting business, specifically, we set up a different incentive structure for the electrician that's working for us. Normally, they get paid by the hour, and that's it. So we had bonus programs. So the more efficient they were on a project, they would have project bonuses that play out as well. So you're trying to figure out where are the issues in the industry for attraction, and what can we do to essentially plus that.
Well, I think that we kind of did this maybe a little bit backwards. I wanted you to talk about your businesses because I think that positions you as more of an expert than we originally positioned you at the start of the podcast.
Sure.
So that was kind of the point of why I wanted to back up and do that. So kind of getting back to, I've got one more segment of this exit dilemma that I wanted to address. So you have, in the book, he describes you have a wealth decision and a life decision to make.
Yes.
And so we've kind of talked about the wealth decision. So let's talk about what a business owner needs to think about when they're thinking about leaving their business and what's going to be next for them.
So he has, I don't know if this is where you're going with it, but a whole concept of like return on life experience. So we have.
You're jumping ahead.
Oh, okay. No, we'll go back to this.
No, I'm kidding. This will segment 9. I just wanted to give you a hard time. I just wanted to. This will segment into the next topic, which is that return on life experience. Yes.
Yeah. So as you're going through life, I think in your 20s. Let's say you start your business in your 20s. Your values and the way you think something is really exciting and you're passionate about can change as you age, right? So you may get into a business in your 20s, you were really passionate about it then, but then you realize, hey, maybe that is not the only thing that's going to fulfill me in life. Maybe I have some other adventures that I want to climb. So, for me, I come from a real estate family, and I had an opportunity at a younger age to get into the merchant side of the business, the product side of the business, with LED lighting and our LED lighting products that we did. I thought real estate was going to be a great path only, and then I realized there was another piece of this business world that I needed to discover. So that's when I got to travel to Asia, and we got to source product.
Yep.
I was kind of supporting the engineers on the development of new products in the LED world. I had an engineering background, but small, and I really needed to explore that piece. So my thoughts had changed over time. Well, then come back around to 2013, I had my second daughter was just born. All of a sudden now I needed to be home. I wasn't traveling.
Yeah.
I can't go to China for 2 to 3 weeks at a time and support my wife and my children
And
at home.
Christy would have a tough time with it.
So then the real estate component became a local business that became way more attractive. So through your life, things are going to change, and that's going to help you decide, do I need to exit this business? Do I need to keep on this path? Do I invest in this, replace myself, and then move on to another venture? So I think that's just a natural course of life. although you have some entrepreneurs that start when they're 20 and then they're 50 years old still running the same business, right?
And there was an example in the book where the business owner had an exit strategy. He pulled himself out of that leadership role, but he was really passionate about product development, so he stayed as a product developer.
Yeah.
And so it talks about entrepreneurs, how they don't necessarily retire, right? They will continue to work. They'll find a new investment opportunity, or they'll plug in their business in a different way. They're not I think he said, what did he use? That they don't want to be the parent staying up all night anymore. They want to be the grandparent and
give it back.
And have fun. Yeah, give it back. And so I thought that was a very eloquent way to explain what a business owner might want to do next to continue, because they don't want to sit around on a beach and do nothing, right?
Yeah. And I think most people who are builders, you're a builder for life. You get a lot of value from that. You're an idea person. The ideas don't stop just because you hit a certain age. But what does slow down is your energy levels. And so, there's a lot of ground game typically in your 20s where you're just ground pounding, you're just grinding, you're connecting, even in your 30s. When you hit a certain age, maybe it's 40 or maybe it's 50 or maybe it's 35, it depends on who you are, you start to have less energy for that and less capacity for that, and you want to be more high level. Mm-hmm. You want to be more instruction in providing, the direction for the team, but you're not the one that does that. So, I always think about as delegate and elevate. You want to delegate out some of those activities that you were doing before, and you want to elevate to your highest and best use of time. Mm-hmm. I think there's that component too. And sometimes you delegate and then elevate out of the business, or you stay on the board and you're part of some of the high-level discussions, but you are on to another opportunity.
Yeah, and it talks about how, and I can relate to this, how it's hard for a business owner to power down, right? And so exiting completely from their life's work is next to impossible for them.
Yeah, and I'm sure, business owners out there, either yourself or someone who has exited business and they had, multiple 7-8 figures that they were paid out. And what do? They started spinning up and connecting to other folks, right, to create another business.
Yep.
And so I think it's just in the DNA of, an entrepreneur is to grow. And when they're not growing anymore, even I've seen, where you grow the business to a certain point, and now it's just an operating business. Not exciting anymore.
Yeah.
It's just operating, it's making money, it's doing great, but the passion of the builder is not fulfilled because he's not really in the building mode anymore.
Right.
So he wants to go resurrect something new, something fresh.
Well, and one of the other things that I talked about is how the business owner is so concentrated on this one business, right? And one of the things that could happen when they exit is they start investing in opportunities, but they spread themselves too thin in some of these opportunities. And then they got 12 things that they're investing in, and maybe it's not the right fit for everything. But, I think when you're completely focused on one singular thing for so long, how do you make sure that what you do next is going to make sense, right?
That's a great question. And I think partnership, a lot of times it's partnering with someone who's been in that industry for a while. That's a great way for them to start to dip their toe in without taking all the responsibility. A business owner is a risk taker by nature. So like when you said they get all this money, and then what do? They go disperse it all out.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, maybe the cash flow is not as strong as their core operating business was, and they get in trouble.
Questions that he asked were, how much do I need for financial independence? How do I ensure I have capital for fun, investing in deals and taking risks? How should I position money for my heirs? How do I address empowerment versus entitlement of my heirs? How can I integrate my goals for legacy to minimize tax? How do I create financial continuity for my spouse and family? And how do I maximize the value of all that I have built? So I feel like we've touched on most of these. Is there any expansion that you want to do for this before we move on?
He does a really good job of asking questions in this book.
I know, I copied most of them.
I'll say one thing too is like, how much is enough money?
When is enough enough?
When is enough enough? So, if you don't know the answer to that question, you're kind of just blindly just trying to grow and figure it out. And you go, hey, this is the lifestyle I want, but I don't know how much it's going to cost.
Right.
So one of the best things I ever did, I went to my certified financial planner as well, and he took what it costs to be Lance, right, in current times. And then he extrapolated that with the inflation that's inevitably happening, right? And he pushed that 30 years out, 20 years out, whatever you want to say that you're, I want to be retired or financially free. I'm not going to retire, but I want to be able to kind of know, hey, when's the point where I don't have to?
Right.
You know, and so you push that out and you understand what that number looks like. Then you know, okay, what does my nest egg need to look like at 8% return to be able to fund that amount per year? So you're looking at, how do I get financially free? What does that look like? And until you know specific numbers, it does make it a little difficult sometimes to envision, you know, not only your life in the future, but how long and how much do I need to make? So I think when you get those milestones set forth, it really clarifies. Now, you could set something up now that you're comfortable with and then double it. It's no big deal.
Sure.
But if you set something up now and you anticipate living a certain way in 20 years from now, and you cut it in half, that might be even more meaningful than doubling it, because now you're changing your vision of your future.
What you're talking about is to me, just kind of this concept idea, right? Thinking about what you're going to need to live in the future.
Yeah.
It's always been a question that has stumped me. I mean, obviously, I have people, wealth managers in place that are answering it for me because I couldn't.
Sure.
But when you start to think about how much money do you need for the rest of your life, well, how long am I going to live?
Correct.
What's inflation going to look like? What's standard of living going to look like? I mean, how, trying to determine what you need. You can only do it based on what you're living off of today, in my opinion.
And honestly, it's like, who are your dependents? Who do you need to take care of? What is the legacy you want to leave, right? It gets into a lot of other discussions.
Yeah.
What do I want to leave behind, right, when I'm not here anymore? So there's not just what do I need to get to the end of my life. Some people have this methodology. They want to bounce the last check they write.
I told my dad to die broke.
Yeah.
I was like,
die broke, right? And that's perfect. It makes you to the end. Others say, I want to have X amount as an endowment,
sure,
right, for years in the future to take care of my most passionate cause. So
yeah, but now you're tapping into the charity. Those were the two things that he discussed: your legacy and charitable, whatever kind of legacy as far as charity is concerned.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly. And he's got some really big ideas in this book, and then yet ask you the questions to break down. Some things you may not be passionate about. Right?
Yeah.
If that's something you're not passionate about, you just skip ahead.
Yeah, I skipped over tax strategy.
Yeah.
No, I read it, but I was like,
not super exciting.
Not exciting. And we're going to talk about something else that isn't super exciting, but I feel like it's a necessary part of the conversation. But anyway, go ahead.
Yes. So there was a couple questions that you asked, and I don't remember all of them, or that he had kind of posed there. Was there any other question that we had missed?
No, I mean, after this, I was going to kind of move on to business continuity, which I don't think is a major discussion. Okay. Yeah. But I also think that after what we have just been through in the whole wide world,
true,
it is a necessary topic to touch on, because I don't know what the statistic is on businesses that failed during the pandemic.
Yeah.
But I can tell you that a lot of what we saw, which you can agree, I'm sure will agree with, is the fact that businesses were not able to pivot.
Right.
Right. I think my favorite example of pivoting was in the restaurant business, because they were hit some of the hardest. And once restaurants started saying that you could pick up alcohol and bring it home.
Margaritas to go.
Yeah, margaritas to go. Tacos and margaritas to go. And they had actually delivery, drivers out delivering, their servers were out delivering food to people to try to keep their businesses going, right? And so talking about the ability to have continuity in your business, no matter what happens in the exterior, I think is an important thing just to touch on.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple pieces to look at. Number one is, who are your people who can pivot and think quick on their feet, right? To recreate a business plan, or set up something into an opportunity, right, when it looks like it's a disaster. But the other piece of that is how much capital do you keep on hand? So if your worst day arrives in your business, you can still last.
I think that's a very important topic.
So, and he talks about, some of this in the book too, is that Ali does is that, you need to have 6 months built up. So one of the first things you need to do is start building up your capital in your business so that you can operate 6 months with zero income. Mm-hmm. Very, very few businesses ever probably achieve that, especially as they're starting up. Yet, if you got more mature businesses, they may be sitting on lots more capital than that.
There was something, I apologize that I'm fumbling for my notes, but there was something that he tapped into about that. It was, and I'm not going to, until I find the note, I'm not going to remember the exact terms that he used, but it was setting up kind of your buckets. Oh, here it is. Working capital, how much cash you need to run your business, and has a timeline of 12 months. These are your liquidity buckets.
Yeah.
Okay. Working capital, how much cash you need to run your business and has a timeline of less than 12 months. Intermediate capital, emergency funds and or capital earmarked for some future opportunity that you have not yet identified, usually in cash with a timeline of 1 to 5 years. And then long-term capital is investing in a long-term strategy. So that's what you're tapping into.
Yeah, very much so. And so as you're building up your cash, right, if you start a business and then you take all that cash out of the business and invest in something else, and then unfortunately the business hits some tide, some headwinds, then all of a sudden you don't have the cash you need to continue to operate.
Correct.
And now you have to make layoffs at very inopportune times, potentially, right? Or you need to cut marketing costs when you're really building momentum. So you don't want to, I think that's his point. Is you first want to build up your working capital buckets, make sure those are full, then your overflow after that can start to go out to other opportunities, investments.
So that's two different kinds of continuity in my mind. There's the financial plan for having an opportunity or needing an opportunity to pivot. And then there's actually what that pivot would look like for your business. I mean, that's not something that we can dive into unless we're talking about a specific business.
Correct.
But I think it's important to identify the distinction between the two.
Agreed.
Let's move on to asset protection. You weren't super stoked about this one, but I'll tell you why, and I told you last night why I thought that this was an important thing to talk about. Because, and it really hit home with me about things like, about protecting my business, and it's just one of those things, like, you don't need it until you do, right? And the people that have their assets protected are typically the ones that have had something happen to them, i.e., a blow up with your business partner, or you've been sued, or any of those things. And I don't know, we all know to do things to set up our assets to be protected, but are we actually doing them? And it made me, it created some exposure. It made me aware of exposure on my end.
I think so. When you talk about startup, I think it falls down lower on the list because you don't have anything necessarily to protect right away.
Sure.
Right. And as the entrepreneur builds the business, all of a sudden it gets to a point where it's a lot to build, and they may have built it over 5 years, and one lawsuit could take it away.
Correct.
If it's not structured properly. So I think it's, as the business succeeds, that's when people start to think about it, or you hear of a lawsuit in the industry, or you have a personal experience. That's when I think this really comes to the forefront.
Yeah.
Like you said, you have an experience that changed your mind on. Personally, asset protection, I think it's fantastic to have. Who wants to work 10 years and have something completely taken away from them? I just think that, there's people that are certainly knowledgeable about that. It's just the more boring side of the growth. Yeah.
Well, I understand that, but it's also when you start to think about it, very scary.
Yeah, right.
And so I think it's that fear for me that's triggering, right? It's like, oh my gosh, because not that my situation is any worse or better than yours, but I'm a single female. I'm responsible to take care of myself. I don't have any dependents or people I'm taking care of, but I am my own legacy. You know what I mean? Like, I've got to take care of all of it. So having those things in place to me is super important. He talks about 3 different categories of assets: exposed assets, which are cash, real estate, revocable trust, and sole proprietorships. Then he talks about deterrent, which are business entities, an FLP. What's that?
Family limited partnership.
Thank you. I didn't know what that was. An LLC and of course an INC. And then the protected accounts are your 529 college accounts, annuities, home equity, irrevocable trust, life insurance, cash value, and retirement accounts. So I think that when you've got your business, deciding everyone is talking about irrevocable trusts, right? To have your assets inside of there so that they're completely protected, right?
Right.
But I also hear conversations about umbrella policies and LLCs. This is related to real estate, of course. And then, of course, there's all different types of other ways that you can set up these businesses so that you're not the one solely responsible at the end of the day, and you've got protection in place.
Right. Well, and his framework inside the book is excellent for asset protection. And I think just, you mentioned it, is the things that are exposed already, your cash in your bank accounts many times, those are the things that become targets. Even equity and property. So how do you mask that equity? Or how do you put them in a protected layer?
How do you mask liquidity?
Well, so in real estate, on a asset, you can have lines of credit, and it shows like there's more of a loan on the home than there actually is.
Interesting.
You don't actually have to utilize the line of credit. It's just if you set a line of credit, it looks like you have less equity. So there are ways to kind of mask equity so that it's just not apparent. You don't become a target that way.
That's new. Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that you're not wrong that he goes into a lot of detail about asset protection. And I definitely, like I said, thought it was an important thing to touch on because I just think it's something that we think about, but we don't think we need to do and then it's too late, right?
Yes, right.
I have a couple of questions for you just in general that I kind of thought of as I was reading the book. And, this is one I bounced off of you last night. And it's made me think a lot because it's not the first, reading it in the book was not the first time that I've heard of this rags to riches story, right? And so you always hear about, how they grew up in the projects and they were so poor and, food stamps and nothing to eat, and all of these things. And then they became these multi-billionaires, right?
Right.
And so it made me think because I was more fortunate and you were too, that we did not grow up in a household that had to severely financially struggle, right?
Right.
And so it made me kind of wonder, do people who were less advantaged growing up have a bigger advantage than those who didn't grow up in a household that financially struggled? Can you be driven to build something out of nothing if you weren't destitute as a child?
I've seen it both ways, right? And I think that the individuals who have nothing, they have something to prove sometimes. And by the way, they don't want to see the pain that their family went through ever again in their life.
Correct.
So they're running from that pain. They're going, I'll do anything that's necessary. I already know what this feels like. So I'll run through brick walls, right?
Yes,
to grow wealth, right?
Yep.
So that I don't ever have to see this again. And then my children will never have to see that. And so I think there is some truth to that, but it's also how they perceive what happened to them as a child. The other hardest part, though, is that, from your parents many times, you get a scarcity mindset when you grow up in that environment. So there's massive mind change that has to happen in that individual, right, to get into this abundance mindset and growth mindset from where they came from. Whereas you and I feel like we were gifted the opposite, a loving family that showed how you can operate and be successful. And so at the same time, you've got a lot of drive. So it didn't take away your drive just because you had success, because your parents probably had good boundaries of their money versus your money.
Right.
Where I see that challenge, individuals is when their parents' money was their money. Yeah. And they didn't have to work for anything. So their brain never engaged at a young age of how am I going to thrive in life? Because you're thinking, my parents have got this. I'm taken care of.
There's the opposite thing. You hear about children that inherit millions and billions of dollars and then they aren't successful and they crash and burn,
Correct.
Right? And so I think that, and look, the what I brought up to you today, I don't know is necessarily, it's probably more of an exception than it is a rule, right? You only hear about the ones that grow up extremely poor and hit these mega milestones in their financial, success.
I think there's some there's some sparkle to that type of story.
Sure.
I grew up in Arkansas, and so the Waltons were a big topic of discussion. They couldn't watch TV until they were 18. They can't touch their, millions and millions of dollars until a certain age. So all of the Walton grandchildren, I should say, from Sam Walton, have been highly, highly successful in very different paths. Now Stuart, I think, has come back to Walmart, working in Walmart, but Tom is not. He's building, trails and has built out the entire trail system all through Fayetteville, Bentonville, Springdale, but very successful lives, not just because of what they were given, because of their own unique passions. So they were raised really, really well within a wealthy environment.
And I think having those restrictions put into place so that your kids don't they need to learn how to manage themselves, manage money, manage businesses on their own instead of just inheriting this giant amount of wealth and then they just don't know what to do with it.
If you take it to the extreme, I think if you have a wild animal, right?
Yeah.
And you feed a wild animal long enough and then take away the food, they're going to struggle.
Mm-hmm.
So, we're wired, right, to go after where is the easy meal? Where is the easy way to be able to connect? If that's taken away, now we have to kick our brain into gear and figure out how am I going to succeed in life?
Well, I had an occasion when I moved to Arizona and then I moved back, right? And when I moved back, that was right during 2009, right? So I worked in a private financial planning firm, so that was on fire.
Yes.
So I
Tough
moved,
time.
yeah, and I was ready to come back home to Texas anyway. But when I moved back, I didn't have a job, right? And so my dad said to me, honey, if you need to come home and stay with us, and you can do all those things. And the best thing I ever got to say have ever been able to say to my dad is thank you. But the best gift you ever gave me was the ability to take care of myself.
Yeah.
I'm good.
Absolutely.
And that was just such a moment that I got to express that to my dad and make him proud of the job that he had done, right?
I mean, it's an incredible gift, as a parent, right, to have limitations on what you do to provide for your children and teach them instead of give them.
Right.
So, you give a man a fish, he eats for a day, teach a man a fish, he eats for a lifetime. It's the same concept. And I think in this day and age, our culture, now we have to look at this, is how has parenting culture changed over time? Well, I can tell you, my children have friends that their Chick-fil-A shows up every day at 11 o'clock, right, at the school because mom sends it, right? So what is the message we're sending to our kids,
We have way too much wealth around here.
So I really think it's even more of a struggle these days. I mean, when you and I turned 16, I was driving the day that I turned 16 because I needed freedom and independence.
Oh, my mom tried to get me a hardship license
Pay
so
for
I could
gas,
start taking care of myself faster.
You got 18-year-olds that haven't even applied for their license
I know,
yet.
it's so weird.
Because they have a private driver, their mom, taking them everywhere they want to go. So I think there's certainly some influence right from the parents that can change the tide of that.
You are not wrong, and I'm going to use another example. Because I had a friend who had a son that graduated from one of the Frisco high schools. And let me tell you, Lance, I have never seen such a celebration of such a, what I think is minor event in your life. Okay. I mean,
or the Sweet 16 birthday parties. I mean, have you seen that? So,
again, the quinceañeras, though, I think are really cool. The way they celebrate them, Hispanic people coming in, the women coming into their womanhood.
Oh, yes.
But,
yes.
Some of this stuff is beyond. So I've seen a lot of examples of that. Kind of getting back to, I only have a couple of more things that I want to touch on before we wrap up today. I thought the segmented planning section was really interesting. I think that that's an important thing to touch on. What it struck in me is, as my own personal journey with doctors, right? And I talked to you about this last night, where I had a general doctor, I had a woman doctor, I had a pain management doctor. I have all these doctors that are helping me with my health.
Right.
And none of them are talking to each other. And so all of them were prescribing
siloed.
meds.
Yep.
And but the meds weren't necessarily supposed to interact with one another. And so I found a doctor that could take care of, that he had segments to his business to be able to take care of everything that I needed in one place.
Right.
So we consolidated medical records, we consolidated prescriptions, and it got me on a much better health journey. So I found that discussion in the book about segmented planning was very relatable to that story. And, because you have a tax person, an attorney, a financial planner, but how are they working together for your ultimate goal? So do you have your people put together in a way that they can help you create that comprehensive plan for your life?
Initially, no. Everything was very siloed. You go to your financial planner separately, then you go to your CPA separately. And actually, it was my financial planner that said, hey, I need all of your contacts for all the other folks that run your life, because I want to connect with them and make sure that they're fit into your financial plan that we've created.
How wonderful is that?
That was new to me. And so, I recognized at that point in time, this is almost like an advisory board, right, for you as a person instead of a company. And they can all weigh in on the different components of their life. And also, you sometimes forget to update certain people in your life, right, that are important. A fact, right? I've bought property many times, and I just forgot to tell my financial planner, or you forget to tell the CPA until it comes time, right? So the more information they have earlier, the better they can help you plan for the future. The other thing I realize is planning and doing are two different components, especially in the CPA world. You can find a lot of CPAs that are really good at doing your taxes. They can do it all, right? But to plan for the future and tell you what you need to do, what activities in the business side you need to do for your next year tax return to be even more lucrative in terms of paying less taxes, that's more unique.
You have one of those people? Because my guy just does my taxes.
They're unique, and yes, they exist. And sometimes it's a separate CPA, right?
Okay.
And so I think, finding more individuals that are better at the planning process, and they're not looking at just what's the here now. what is the next 5 years? If they're not asking those questions, you should be asking them, how do they advise their client, their clientele on where you're going. And if you're in high growth mode, things change really quickly. Every year they change. And so I think you're building out your advisory board so that they interconnect together. And if they have a problem interconnecting, they're probably not good for your team.
Well, and I think a good piece of advice is your wealth manager, finding the right fit for your wealth manager. And that can be a very expensive undo if you don't pick the right person. And my experience has been that a lot of wealth managers, I'll go back to maybe a better term is a financial planner. I don't know. Wealth managers to me encompass your entire portfolio, right? But I had someone that I had been recommended to me, and he just pushed one product, right? And that was it. And I was like, well, is this it? Because I've got...
It's the one-trick pony.
Yeah. And so I found out I had already invested my money, and then I figured out that was it. So I'm like, this is not for me. And this also is not the right product fit for me because I need liquidity to go buy more real estate when I need to. And so it was an expensive undoing.
Yes.
So I think that is one thing that take your time, interview these people, make sure that they're interested in your whole business, not just one part of it. I think that is some just really necessary advice.
Well, and it's also a fit for who you are. I invest in real estate in private companies primarily. And so they don't make any money off of me. A financial planner doesn't make any money off of me if I'm not investing in certain products of
That's
theirs.
True.
So I had to find a fee-based financial planner. I want to pay him a certain amount per year to just help give me advice and be a support.
Okay, that's interesting.
He'll make commissions on products if I pick up a life insurance product along the way. They'll make some extra commissions, but I want to pay them so that he doesn't have to ignore all the other wealth pieces that I have. He can actually encompass all of them and feel like he's still getting paid what he's worth.
That is an interesting concept. I think that's a great golden nugget.
Yep. So fee-based versus commission-based, and finding that person. Again, if you're investing only in real estate, there's not a lot of financial planners that want to have anything to do with you that are commission-based.
Correct, because they're not going to make anything off of it. The last thing that I want to talk about, and this won't be a long conversation, but he said this twice. Everything begins and ends with cash flow.
Sometimes you have great equity growth opportunities in a business. And so I was very focused on, investing into a business that was going to have great equity growth. And we were putting more and more and more money into it, right? Well, the challenge was it was having no cash flow come back. I had to get cash flow from, in this case, my real estate business that was coming in, to be able to neutralize the negative cash flow in this business. And we just kept feeding and feeding. And in this case, it actually did not survive. It didn't work out. So it ended up being a large loss. So how long can you invest in any business without getting cash flow back? Some investors are just dividend or cash flow investors too. You always have to be paying attention to, where's my cash coming from? And you can only have so many just equity growth opportunities when you're spending a lot of money into those with negative cash flow. We talked about the same thing, I think, about rental properties, right?
Yep.
You can have negative cash flow, but somewhere has to be a consistent cash flow source to make sure that you can get over the tide, over this little hump, right, until it begins building that cash flow that you actually need.
I'm in one of those situations currently because my last purchase, well, not my last purchase, second to last, it was the only one I do the bird method, right?
Yes.
So it was the last one I hadn't cash out refied, right? I bought it in December 2021. I renovated it into January 2022. I bought another property in July, so that postponed the refi because I can only do so much at once.
Yeah.
So I was like, I still need my capital, right? And so it was really, and this is something he talks about in the book briefly, but I had to come to a decision. Do I leave my capital tied up in this house, or do I take the hit knowing that my interest rate's going to double?
Right.
I'm going to go into a negative cash flow situation. But you
get your cash back.
But I got my cash back.
Right.
And I put the bulk of it into another investment that would yield me a higher rate of return.
Right.
So I took 2 years worth of negative cash flow the amount for 2 years of negative cash flow, put it into that bank account for that rental property, and took the rest of it and reinvested in something that would bring me a higher rate of return. And then I can wait out interest rates, right? And if they do go down, I can do another refi, bring down the interest rate, hopefully bridge that gap between the negative cash flow and what I'm taking in rent. But if not, guess what? I got a house to sell, and I'll go find another opportunity. So
no, exactly. But you did that because you also had equity in that property. So, again, sometimes that's the decision we make is, hey, can I go short on my cash flow for a period of time because I have a lot of equity I can gain by capturing this property,
Correct.
Right? And, same thing in businesses, right? Some businesses don't throw back that cash flow until later in, but you have equity growth in the project. A lot of these, or I should say some of these even investments that you're doing on multiplexes, like when you're throwing in money for a syndicate, let's just say, some of them have pretty healthy dividends, and some of them hold on to those dividends and don't release them, and they give you bigger growth on the back end because they're reinvesting that into the fix-up of the property, let's say. So it just depends on your life and where your money's coming from.
Well, before we wrap up, is there anything lastly that you feel driven to talk about to wrap up the show for today?
You ask me this every time. So
any advice?
Yeah. I think here's one thing that I'm pretty passionate about is that if you have, excitement toward an opportunity or business, you mentioned you want to do a flip, for example. I think the best thing you can possibly do, go find a mentor and do one with someone. Like go in and get a deal done, because the value of the experience, you grow 10 times as much versus just reading books on a subject. So you educate yourself, and then you go take action with someone. Otherwise, you'd never take lift off.
You're not wrong about that. I actually had a conversation with one of your clients, and they listed out all the books that they read and all the things that they were. And I'm like, when are you going to buy a house?
Yeah. It's time.
I mean, it's time. You're ready. You've done all the research. Don't get caught up in analysis paralysis. And I really liked what you said about a mentor, because they're going to have the expertise to keep you from getting yourself in trouble while you're trying something new.
The best thing you can do in life is model someone else. In that way, you're getting 90%, and then you can get creative after you get to the 90% execution.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great place for us to stop for today. So thank you always for joining me. I appreciate our relationship so much.
Likewise.
And this has been a really great challenge for me and great conversation for today. So thank you for joining us on another episode of The Closing Table. Again, I'm your host, Tamera Gady. If you like my content, you're really going to love my escrow team. So let's get a conversation started about your title needs, and you guys make it a great day.